All right, everybody, we are going to go ahead and get going. Again, my name is Bob Cruz. I am CEO and co-founder of Checkpoint Technologies. Thank you so much for joining us. And I am so excited to be here with Adam Sandman of Inflectra. Adam, please feel free to introduce yourself to the audience.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate it. Nice to be here today. I'm the CEO of Inflectra Corporation, and we're a company that's committed to quality in all matters. And in today's talk, we're going to be talking about test automation and some of Bob and myself's top 10 tips. So with that, we should get going, and let's get this crowd some exciting information.
Fantastic. And hopefully everybody can see my screen without a problem. Katie and Adam, can you confirm that?
Yep.
All right, fantastic. So everybody, this is the GoToWebinar instructions panel. You should see a little questions section there in the control panel. Might not look exactly like mine, but please enter your questions there. We have Katie, who's going to be moderating for us today, and she's going to ask the questions as we go. She might save some for the end, but if we don't get to your question, Adam and I will take a look at all of the questions when the webinar is over, and we're going to send those out to all attendees probably in about a week or two. Might be even a little bit longer because I know Adam's doing some traveling. So please feel free to ask questions or even make comments. We want this to be interactive. So during the agenda, we're going to talk about top 10 challenges. And each time Adam or I present a challenge, we are also going to share the impact of that challenge if it is not addressed, if it's not resolved. We're also going to share about solutions that you can use to overcome the challenge. Our focus will be on functional automated testing, and we're going to share also with you the criteria of a good, solid automation assessment. What we will not cover, we're not going to be talking about technical challenges specific to specific automation solutions, because each automation solution has its benefits and it has its own limitations. We're not going to talk about challenges pertaining to a specific programming languages or issues with hardware, security, or networking. And we are not, in this presentation, we're not going to discuss performance nor application security testing. But Adam and I, we've got just a lot of experience. As Adam shared, I've been in IT for about 35 years. So we're very confident you're going to get some good information out of this. And again, we want you to share your thoughts and your expertise as well. So with challenge number one, I have probably consulted for about 240 different organizations. And one of the things that I found is that many of them do not fully take advantage of data driving. So in other words, storing data relevant to a test case and using a set of data, as a record. And typically you're going to have a test that gets executed once for each record, and that's going to have data that gets input. The challenge for most organization seems to be getting the team to take full advantage of data driving. Is this something, Adam, you've encountered as well in your consulting?
I think we do come across clients with this, because what happens is developers will often be the ones, and we get into this a little bit in the next slides, writing the tests, and they so focus on that, they forget the benefit and the ROI is running it many times with data permutations. Whereas a manual tester who's had to go through the same sequence of pages 100 times on browsers, mobile devices, they quickly get the problem because they've had to live it themselves. So I feel like because they haven't experienced the pain, a lot of times the people building automation type solutions or doing automation testing haven't experienced the manual pain, so they sort of forget about it. And I think also they think it's too hard when there are actually tools that can provide solutions for getting data, making obfuscating data, making it private. So there are tools that make the data acquisition easier, which is often the roadblock.
Oh, that's a great point. One of the things that Adam and I realized is that when an organization doesn't fully utilize data driving with their automation tool, one of the things they're going to do, and you're going to hear this phrase throughout, but they fail to realize the maximum return on investment with that solution, as well as the fact that they have much greater challenges, more difficulty testing multiple conditions. Because when you think about it, in a lot of test cases, especially those that are good candidates for test automation, the tester will be performing many of the same actions over and over again, but with different data. And based on that data, they may or may not expect different results. One of the things that's great to do is to store your expected results in that spreadsheet that you're data driving, that you're using for data driving. So use it not only for input, but also for the expected results. One of the other impacts is that if you have a lot of data, a lot of information, hard-coded, if you will, in your automated script, then you're going to end up increasing the maintenance time. If you do a good job at putting the data in the spreadsheet and making your automated test more flexible, more versatile, then what you'll find is when there is a change, and maybe the change is on expected results or the data that's needed, instead of having to modify the script, you only need to modify the spreadsheet. So another big benefit. You can train and educate your team. That is key. Don't leave it up to your team to educate themselves with the solution, because we've all heard the cliche that you don't know what you don't know. So if you get an expert to train the team, they will learn so much more and be able to use it in the real world. Implement guidelines and standards. So you should have an test automation 101 policy and procedures, where perhaps you give guidelines for variables, names, different parameters, what shall be data-driven, what shall not be data-driven. Enforce those guidelines and standards. So maybe have peer reviews once a certain number of automated tests have been created. And also implement a strategy for test data creation and management. That is key. If you have each individual doing their own thing, things tend to get out of whack. And you want to be able to integrate all of your tests, which is also much easier to do when you're using data driving and everybody is utilizing the same strategy.
And Bob, one other thing to mention for everyone is that if you don't do that last thing, the danger is someone's going to cut corners and take production data and test with that. And now you're going to end up sending out potentially people's private information, and particularly in Europe and other countries, you can go to jail for doing stuff like that, even if it's a complete accident. So you be very careful with data. It can be very valuable. It can be very dangerous. So it's important to have a centralized strategy for it.
Absolutely. Great point, Adam. Great point.
And hey, Bob and Adam, I've got a great question from one of our attendees. Gentleman says, how realistically feasible is it to build functional test automation scripts within an agile methodology?
We have found it to be very realistic. The key there is utilizing a solution that minimizes the amount of coding that has to be done, and also to create very modular, data-driven tests so that you can integrate and piece them together based upon the functionality that has to be tested.
And I think also we'll be talking about this a little bit later on, but also with an agile project where the functionality is evolving, it's also knowing when to automate and what to automate. Because in an agile methodology, some parts may be correct candidates for automation, other parts might not be just yet, and that's okay. So I think that's a maturity aspect as you in agile you need to think about. And I'm going to move on to the second challenge, which is interesting because it also touches in my mind on agile as well, which is implementing an efficient framework. And if you ever go to a testing conference, which Bob and I sometimes get the privilege to do so, everyone talks about frameworks, Selenium frameworks, my framework, your framework. And frameworks can be really powerful and very dangerous at the same time. And one of the challenges I think we see is that either you have people just learning a testing tool, or whatever it is, and just going at it, or they spend a whole bunch of time creating an overly complicated framework. So if we go to the next slide. So if you don't effectively implement a framework, one of two things will usually happen. One is that you'll have no framework at all, which means everyone on the team who's creating automation is doing duplicative work. There's nothing that being learned as a team. There's like 6 different scripts to log in. There's nothing reusable. And therefore, the amount of time you're spending automating new stuff is reduced because you're all spending the same time automating the same stuff. On the flip side of that, however, there's also a tendency to create the most elaborate, powerful framework that you can take to a conference and present and be really excited. But the business doesn't get any value out of a framework. A business gets value when tests run and testing is done, and that's only when the framework is in use. So creating a framework that's overly complicated or has to be finished means that you actually may get zero ROI, because if no tests are run, there's zero return. So if you go into the next slide.
And Adam, one thing just very quickly I want to share is I actually knew of an engineer once, or an organization that utilized an engineer, and it took them over 6 months to create a framework. And during that 6 months, they did not execute one single automated test. So they received no value from that solution for 6 months. And if you've got the strategy, like you've said, you should let that framework evolve.
Absolutely. If you go to the next slide, it's interesting. If you look at the development community, they already had this problem. It was called waterfall. We designed for 6 months, we developed for 6 months, and we tested for 6 months, and nothing ever worked. And so Agile came about by the idea of that, let's build a bit, test a bit, and refactor and rebuild and improve and evolve. So if you take that same concept of Agile, but apply it to your test scripts, test code, test framework, it's the same thing. You start by automating what needs to be automated, and then you do it as an MVP, a minimum viable solution for your tests. And then the team gets together, looks at the tests, and can then find which of those tests that we've automated that work and run, what's common, what are our common processes. Let's create some modular libraries. Let's reuse some stuff. Let's teach each other and cross-train so that I can use something you wrote and you can use something I wrote. And then we've now got a framework, a very simple framework. And then we just repeat that, write some more tests, have a retrospective, add some more framework. Test framework in an iterative way, and that way there's always ROI being given to the business.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add, Bob, on that?
Absolutely. No, it's so true. Frameworks are important, especially when you've got a team that consists of less technical people. With a good framework, they're going to be able to get much more involved in developing automated tests. So no, absolutely. It's a challenge that, we've both seen at so many places. And then on challenge number 3, it's key that everybody commit to the investment required to realize a return on investment. And that's at the managerial level and at the user level. So that's not only during the ramp up with the solution, but also once it's implemented. It's an ongoing commitment. With no commitment, education on the tool and thus utilization of the tool will suffer. It's when people aren't educated, they get so frustrated and they don't use the tool initially as it's supposed to be used, and then eventually they don't use it at all. So the return on investment does not get realized, or worse, a loss is realized, and the automation tool becomes shelfware. Adam and I have been in so many places where we've gone in organization and they've invested a solution, but they haven't used it for years because for whatever reason, the commitment wasn't there and their team didn't become successful with it. And the other disadvantage, obviously, is the highest quality of the application being tested doesn't get realized. Because when functional automation is used correctly, it can be an incredible asset in helping quality for an application improve. And you want to avoid that frustration. You want to be successful. And without commitment, it just can't happen. So some solutions for that is make sure at the beginning, your individual testers, leadership, that they understand the commitment needed early on in time, money, and resources. Be supportive of the team and the automation initiative. Get them educated. Make sure that the team remains open-minded, provide training, set guidelines and standards. When you take the time to set guidelines and standards and policy and procedures, that shows what we were talking about a moment ago. That shows the commitment, and it shows that you're serious about being successful. And utilize collaboration. Involve the team in decisions, or at the very least, explain to them why you're doing what you're doing.
That's a really good point. I think the two of the things I've seen fail a lot are the open-minded and the team decisions, and even the guidelines. Because what seems to happen is someone who wants to test automation, they don't get commitment from the team. They maybe get lukewarm commitment from the managers. They implement a tool, they automate 20% of the app or some percentage of the app. It works, but then there's no one behind them on the rest of the team who's supporting it. And then they move on to something else. The tests keep running. Then one day the app changes, they break. The management's like, well, these tests don't work, let's get rid of them. The tools go on the shelf, and then the team starts again, and it never permeated the organization. Unfortunately, that seems to be a common cause.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next slide. Cool. And going along with that, and this is now, I would like to answer the earlier question that Katie brought up about an Agile project, because I think this is really important. Again, if you go to a testing conference, you'll see lots of talks on test automation, and you might come back and say, we're going to automate every single test we have in the entire application. Or you might come back and say, wow, that looked really hard. Let's automate nothing. So neither is the right answer. Automation is not a panacea, and automation is different. So it's really important to understand the strengths and weaknesses of automation versus human testing. And I won't call it manual, I'll say human. So if you go to the next slide, the impact is that what you'll do is you will automate tests that should be manual, and you'll have manual tests that should be automated. And what happens then is, as I said, you have these broad goals of doing everything automating nothing, and then you spend so much time on a framework, like we said before, that nothing really happens. You never get anywhere, never show any progress. So if you go to the next slide, the solution to this is understanding what brings value. And so, for example, to give you two extreme cases, imagine we have a test, which is to log into the application, click on every navigation element, test it with 100 logins, and try to test it on 5 browsers. Now that to me sounds like a really good candidate for automation. It's incredibly repetitive. Humans will definitely make mistakes because we'll forget which browser, which tab we clicked on. And you've got to do this every single sprint. It'll drive humans to madness, and it's a waste of their time. It takes a long time, and they'll make mistakes, and it's going to require lots of data inputs. A converse example would be, I need to log in once a year and check that this really complex 20-step process works and read a PDF to make sure the report looks good. Now, I could automate that. It would take me probably 2 months to automate and save me 1 hour of manual testing. So there's negative ROI there. So when you look at those two extreme cases, find the ROI for every test you're doing. If it's something you're doing frequently, multiple versions, it's tedious, it's got lots of manual steps that are boring, and lots of different conditions and data and things that humans have to check, that's something that sounds to me like a great candidate for automation. It takes maybe 5 hours to automate and saves you hundreds of hours. If it's a test that's got lots of validation, lots of exploration, lots of human results, or results that are unclear, it's ad hoc, or it's something you do once a year. It's not a frequently run test or part of the system. The ROI is probably negative. So I think between those two examples, you'll know what to do, and you can calculate the ROI for each type of test and see what makes sense. And Bob, anything I'd add?
On this, one of the things I would add, while you're doing the analysis of your test cases to identify excuse me, the candidates to automate and the candidates to leave manual, that is also a great time to identify those tests that you know is a good candidate to be automated, and it's a critical test. So you're going to get much higher impact, much higher ROI with your automation solution if you can start with tests that are easy to automate, but you know they get executed frequently. The other thing is, it is also a great time to start performing risk analysis on your test cases, so that once you've got your test automated, and also those you're going to leave manual, start executing those with the highest risk, those with the highest likelihood of occurring, with the highest impact to the organization. So that during this analysis, that's a great time to perform those tasks as well.
Absolutely. And one last thing about the question about Agile, I forgot to mention that when you're doing an Agile, you may have parts of the app that are still forming. Those are probably not candidates for automation. And when you get to later sprints and that earlier functionality is more solid, those might then become candidates. So it's not a static one-time analysis with Agile. It might be that over time, things become candidates for automation that weren't, 4 sprints previous.
Absolutely. And then on challenge number 5, we find organizations often have difficulty planning and implementing an automation strategy. And automation must be planned and well thought out. As Adam mentioned a while ago, it is very different than manual testing. It requires a different strategy. It requires different skills, has different considerations. You're going to have to make sure you have more test data. It provides different benefits. And it should be a strategy that you utilize and implement throughout the organization. If you don't develop a strategy, then automation may grow out of control and become the primary testing focus. And remember, you want quality to be the focus, not one specific type of testing. And another impact is that without a strategy, automation often gets set aside. So make sure you keep these different impacts into consideration. Some solutions. Understand and accept that automated testing strategy is very different from manual testing strategy. If any of you want to discuss further as to how it's different, feel free to reach out to Adam or myself. Consider automation to be a part of your overall testing strategy. It's a tool that you're going to use along with all of the other tools such as peer reviews, code checks, walkthroughs, unit testing, etc. And early in the planning stage, have automated assessment performed. So with an automation assessment, that is where you can take a look at your processes, your environment, your application, the solutions you're using so that you understand what its limitations are. These are all things you want to start figuring out early on in the game so that you can develop that strategy.
Right, and definitely, because otherwise what could happen is the automation, you have a situation where the automation and the automated tests all pass, go green, and you could give it to the hands of a user and they find a bug in 2 minutes because you haven't had any humans, any exploratory testers look at the app. And we see this all the time. And then you'll say, well, automation failed, and it didn't. Automation did its job, but quality didn't do its job. That's the difference, as Bob was saying.
Absolutely. The automated test is only going to do what you create it to do. So always remember that.
Hey, Bob and Adam, I have an attendee asking for some examples of automated versus manual testing strategies.
And so with a manual testing strategy, I'm going to, when you think about when you do manual testing, there are a lot of different validations that you're performing when you do a manual test that you're not even thinking about. So you may get a lot more covered. With automated testing, again, it's only going to do what you tell it to do. So a lot of times, people will consider the fact that the automated testing may not perform exactly the same thing as the manual test because they're doing so many things intuitively without really thinking about it. That's one thing. The other thing that you have to think about is with automated testing, you can execute a good test in a distributed fashion and unattended. So in other words, if you've got 1,000 test cases and you've got to perform all of those manually, then you're going to perform them sequentially. And naturally that will be a significant number of hours. With automated testing, you have to think about the fact I have these 1,000 automated test cases and I can execute 100 on machine A, 100 on machine B, and so on. And you have to be more careful about the order in which you're executing them in case test A provides something that test C needs. Adam, would you care to add to that and give any other examples?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The test data is the key because with automated testing, if you just simply take your manual tests and try to automate them in a linear fashion, you're either going to have to run them one at a time, which defeats the point of automation, or you run them all in parallel and the test data doesn't line up and you don't get valid results. So you have to find and track accurate, plan for the dependencies between the tests so you can understand like an execution tree, what's automatable independently, whereas in manual testing, you rarely think of that for the most part. So you have to think of like an execution decision tree as to what's the sequence I can run all these tests in that minimizes dependencies, knowing that there will be some dependencies. It's not that you can run 1,000 all simultaneously on 0 seconds.
That's right. And then, another thing I know a lot of organizations get concerned about is security, because with automated testing, you may want to create a secure test lab that can be locked, because those machines are going to be logged in executing tests. Whereas when you're doing it manually, you're going to be there on your machine to ensure that nobody else comes over and takes it over. So those are just a few things to consider. I hope that answered the question well. And again, we could certainly, I'm sure Adam and I could give a lot more. Now, with an automation assessment, I'm sharing just a few of the different criteria that you would want to look at and consider when performing an assessment or having an automation assessment performed by a neutral party. One of the things that should be reviewed is the environment, the test environment, as well as the production environment. Take a look at the automated tool experience of the team and perform a training evaluation to determine how are you going to get your testing team up to speed. Do you need to bring on outside contractors perhaps to help you get ramped up and start mentoring the team? Take a look at the test automation process documentation. Look at the automation environment that's going to be utilized. I mentioned about a test lab. Are you going to have a test lab? How many licenses do you have? How many machines do you have available? Think about and factor in the automated test design process that you're going to utilize and the test execution process. So you may end up having test sets where they're grouped together with the specific focus of doing regression testing. You may have another test set that's focused on validating that high priority defects have been resolved. So how are you going to group them together? How are you going to execute them? And what are the highest priorities? So these are just a few things that you would look at with an assessment.
So on to number 6. What about the team that's going to do the automation? And I think a lot of times teams will look at this in two ways. One is they'll look at what's the well, we're going to use this tool. This is the programming language. How can we therefore get the right team to do that? The second thing is often forgotten is what kind of application is this? Is this an application like Expedia that every single person has used to book flights or hotels? We've all done that. Or is it a complex application like it's a pharmacy system that doctors use? And so do those skills exist in the same person? Does someone who knows how to test a pharmacy system also know automation? Probably not is the answer. It's a business user. So when we talk about skills, there's different kinds of skills. Technical skills, there's going to be functional skills, and then there's automation experience skills. And actually, from a fourth standpoint, there's even the type of application skills. Web apps are different to test, and mobile apps, they're different to desktop apps, irrespective of whatever programming language you're writing the tests in. So skills is a whole big thing that has to be considered as part of your strategy. Next slide. Because if you don't, what's going to happen? Well, first of all, if the team doesn't understand the tool they're using and the skills don't align with the tool, either the current team or the future team, it's going to quickly become shelfware. Obviously, if a team doesn't understand how to write the tests in an efficient way, they'll either build overly complicated frameworks because they'll rely on what they read online. There'll be no framework. Either way, over time, ROI is going to be suboptimal because you're either overcoding or undercoding. And also, of course, the time to automate will take too long. And since one of the benefits of automation is time to market, if people start to see it taking a long time, it undermines the confidence that management will have in sponsoring it, which goes back to the comment that Bob made earlier about management, buy-in. And so to avoid this aspect, if you go to the next slide, when it comes to solutions, first thing is look at your current team. If your team is a hardened bunch of JavaScript developers or a hardened bunch of Python developers, then there's certain tools that use those languages. So that's something to look at. What skills do they have or can easily acquire? What automation experience do they have? If they don't have that much, maybe something that's simpler but guides you more is better than something that's more complicated. And then, of course, from a skills standpoint, do the team understand the application being tested? If not, you may have to have a different mix of testers, manual, functional, automated, working together on automation. It isn't just one person's job. So once you've identified what the skills are, and those maybe who know more, a little bit less, you can build the team structure. Then you can look at, how do I improve the skills? Because obviously you may not have everyone knowing the system day one. Maybe the doctors and nurses of a pharmacy system could train the automation engineers to just be a little more knowledgeable about pharmacy. And maybe an automation engineer could explain to a functional user some of the limits of automation. So that way they're on the same page, so they can speak the same language. And then over time, make sure that you not only do this at the beginning, but as time moves on, that your technical users gain functional knowledge and your functional knowledge, users gain some technical knowledge. And then the people at the top are leading the effort are also making sure that they educate the whole team so that if they ever roll off, it doesn't become shelfware again. Any thoughts, Bob, on that?
No, it's the composition of an automation team. I mean, it's as we know, we want to have a lead and or an administrator, and any team. If you look at any successful team, I don't care what career it's in. I mean, it can be in sports, it can be whatever, but everybody has a different set of skills. Everybody brings something different to the table, and that's what you need with successful automation. If you've got an especially small team, if you only have 1 or 2 people doing the automation, it's important for that individual to develop a combination of skills. So these are some important things. What percentage of the team should be involved? It really depends on the size and skill set of the quality assurance, quality control software testing team. And one of the things that I advise organizations when they pull us in and they're looking for us to be agnostic and recommend a solution, one of the things I want to evaluate is how technical are their team members and how involved do they want to get each team member in automation? Because the great thing with a lot of the solutions out there now is you don't have to have people that are exceptionally technical, but you've got to have people that understand testing. That's first and foremost. Adam, you and I have, we've always said that a fool with a tool is still a fool. It's a great automation solution isn't going to make them a better tester. So it's important that they're a good tester. And then you have to look at, are you required to work with what you have, or can you expand your team? So this is something that Adam and I have discussed, and this is just a basic skill assessment exercise that helps you identify with your team, each team member, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are they in regards to their technical skills? So you might ask them, do you consider yourself to be technical? What's a loop? What's an array? What's a conditional statement? So these are some things that you can ask them, go through, but then also start questioning them from a methodology point of view. Can they describe an automation strategy? Describe a test that should not be automated? And hopefully they'll come back with saying, well, if I know that a requirement for a test where that requirement is being validated, it's going to become obsolete in a month, and it hasn't been automated yet, you know what, maybe that we should keep manual then. What data in a script would you not parameterize, and what are the benefits of modularization? So by doing this basic skill assessment, you can identify those on your team that might be suitable to be the automation lead, an automation technical advisor. You might think of them more as almost an architecture, or perhaps an automation administrator. So, when you start talking about those that are stronger in the methodology knowledge, they're thinking about, okay, what should be automated? What has the higher risk? What makes sense to automate for the business? Whereas on the more technical side, they're going to be able to provide value and help understand how it should be automated. What's the most efficient way? So this quadrant that you see in front of you really provides value when you're trying to build your team and delegate the correct roles. And on challenge number 7, executing automated tests unattended and remotely, it's amazing how many organizations do not do that. Many users just fail to utilize the feature. It might be lack of confidence. It might be lack of secure environment, conflict with other processes. The other thing that seems to be amazing is sometimes you get people that just want to sit and watch the automated test run. The impact of this, if you're not utilizing a solution to run unattended virtually, then you won't realize the significant return on investment. You'll have much greater challenges testing on different machines with different setups. So I'm sure that you're going to want to test different operating systems, different browsers, things like that. And you're not going to be able to create automated tests on local machines while tests are being executed on that machine. So this is one of the reasons, for example, you'd almost always want to get at least 2 licenses. So set up a secure dedicated testing environment with network asset. Make sure you own, as I mentioned, at least 2 automated testing solutions, and ensure that everybody has adequate knowledge about the different automation solution that's being used.
And one thing I like to add here about unintended execution as well is understand the benefits and some of the trade-offs for that, because you can run automated tests on physical machines, virtual machines. You can also run them on what are called headless machines. It's like a serverless environment using simulated devices. There are tools out there like Source Labs and Browser Stack and others that let you basically rent environments, and when you run them on those machines, there's never actually a real desktop. There's no real GUI being run, and that can sometimes give you false positives or false negatives if it's something like hovering, which is hard to do without actually having an actual mouse moving. So understand with unattended, there are different ways to do unattended. Some give you greater scale, some give you greater realistic coverage, and you may need to have a variety of different kinds of unattended execution to really get good coverage and good efficiency. And then also, one thing from a commercial standpoint, look at when you look at the licensing, make sure you cover how much it costs to buy the tools to write and how much it costs to buy the tools to run. Because some automation tools will charge you the same for a running license as a developing license. Others charge a cheaper amount for running it. Some don't charge at all. So when you're doing looking at commercial tools in particular, do make sure you understand the licensing for the creation tool and the execution tool, because it's not always the same.
Great points. Great points.
Number 8 is me. The challenges of calculating ROI. So the problem is, as always, that they always say, if you can't measure it, how can you improve it? And that's just unfortunately the nature of life. And whenever you're looking at budgets for automation or budgets for anything, you need to be able to prove to someone after you've done something, why was it good? Why did it help? What was the ROI we got back? And there's different kinds of ROIs you can see here. There's the direct savings in both the time it takes people to run the tests. Those testers can do other things using exploratory testing. You're covering more of the application than you probably had time to cover before. But the indirect one is really important too, which is, are we actually getting higher quality? Are we avoiding risks that we wouldn't have seen otherwise? Are we seeing the overall customer support ticket load coming down because the application is of much higher quality? For example, we make software testing tools, which is interesting because who are our target users? They're testers. And which users are going to report problems to a support desk? Testers. So we have to sell things to testers who have a job of testing. So for us, quality has to be so high. And for anyone who's got a business nowadays, people are so quick to change applications and change businesses that your business is only good as the quality of the app. And so you need to be able to have the ROI of the benefits to the user, which could be number of support tickets. It may not be the classic metrics. So to go to the next slide. If you don't calculate ROI either well or think about it, management's going to quickly say you're a cost. You're a cost to the business. We are maybe entering a recession, depending on what you read in the news. And so you're seen as a cost center. And so they'll either abandon the effort, they'll cut back on your team, they won't let you upskill the people that we had mentioned, or they might decide to automate the wrong things. Either way, if people don't understand value, they make short-term decisions or wrong decisions. And so therefore, what we would recommend is, if you go to the next slide, is it's really important to track data. And I would say the number one thing to do is, before you do any automation, get some baseline metrics. Once you start, it's very hard to prove how you've improved things. So before you do any automation, do the assessment of the test cases that Bob mentioned earlier. And when you decide the candidates for automation, capture the current runtime, number of people, the coverage. Capture as much as you can of these different metrics you see on the slide here. Capture them before you do a single iota of automation. and do it for each test or each section of the app or whatever different types of tests, whatever level of granularity is feasible. Once you've done that, now you can actually do automation, and again, the first steps of it, and now you can track the difference, and you'll be able to get an ROI. First of all, it allows you to prove the value to management, but two, it also helps you refine your strategy. Because if you thought you were going to get a 20% ROI in automating tests, 1 through 10, and when you actually track the metrics, you didn't, look at your strategy. Your strategy may have been flawed, and it's okay to be flawed if you course correct, but don't keep making the same mistake over and over again. That's insanity. So capture good metrics before, during, and after, and then use that to refine your strategy.
And I can't emphasize enough what Adam mentioned. It's critical that if you're not being successful with automation now, or if you're not using automation, then now is the time to start gathering those metrics, because you have to have that baseline. You need something to compare it to. So absolutely critical.
And of course, if you don't do this, what's going to happen is these other benefits of automation are not going to be established. So the quality, as we mentioned, is the key reason. We're doing automation because we want to get quality. It is not because we believe automation is itself a panacea. So how many times have we released a new version of software and we found that there were bugs that had been fixed before that came back, classic regression issues? Well, those costs could have been prevented, because every time that happens, you've got to deal with customer support. You've got to train your users. So really, it's important to make sure that your quality is driving everything you do. And the same thing with inspections and testing. When you're doing automation, make sure that you are looking at how is automation improving reducing the cost, reducing the impact of the business of finding errors, because you can find errors early with automation by trying lots of things quickly that would take too long. And then lastly, as I mentioned, if you deliver the cost to the customer reputationally, everyone's a one-star Yelp review away from having a business impact, or your help desk has to be staffed up because you've got so many tickets coming in because of the poor quality that your cost in reducing people has been offset by the cost of hiring more people in a different place. And then lastly, if your defect in your system is serious, if this is a medical system, a pharmacy system, like I had mentioned, people could lose their lives over this. And there have been cases of people being prescribed the wrong drugs, and people can go to jail, or the company can be out of business. So certainly for some of the mission critical systems that our customers are testing, failure cannot be an option. And so automated testing has to be part of the strategy, and the ROI is not just business, it's actually mission critical ROI.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So with challenge number 9, we find a lot of organizations have difficulty in creating a full suite of automated tests so that it's a full system test. Tests, as we all know, they need to be integrated to validate the system. Tests standalone should validate, specific granular requirements, but integrated, once you start putting them all together, you want more of an end-to-end validation. And the biggest challenge here, and we mentioned this earlier with data-driven, but biggest challenge with this is it seems to be test data management. And the impact that you've got here is that the system requirements fail to get validated, and you don't think about the processes that are up or downstream. And again, you fail to maximize the return on investment. So some solutions. Define a test automation administrator. And we talked about that basic skill assessment that you're able to do, who can track the progress relative to the types of testing. So, they would take a look at the tests that are automated and say, okay, what do we have that fall into the category of unit or component testing? What do we have for integration testing, system, regression, and so on? Define a test data lead. So test data lead to handle the generation and management of test data. When you're generating test data, there are multiple ways it should be done. If any of it is pulled from production, it needs to be scrubbed in all likelihood. Some of it may need to be created manually, because you can't guarantee that you don't know for certain that all of the different scenarios and conditions you want to validate are going to exist in production. Maybe they don't come around that often. Maybe those conditions or scenarios are infrequent. Develop a strategic framework to ease the effort of implementing a fully automated end-to-end system test. If you do that, you will find life so much easier, not only in regard to development time, but also in regard to maintenance time.
And number 10, last for lucky. And this is interesting because we have a place where automation has become so prevalent at conferences and people talk about it a lot and people are doing it a lot, which is fantastic. Automation used to be a much more of a niche field and it wasn't done as much. The great news now is that automation is being done to a much larger scale than ever before. The problem with that, unfortunately, is that everyone is using a variety of different tools, which is fine. Like they can use Python, they can use JavaScript, they can use Java. But the problem is that because they're picking up these tools often from scratch, they're focusing a lot on the programming language. They're not necessarily focusing on the testing and the testing frameworks. Whether that's a commercial tool or open source framework, it doesn't matter. In most cases, there are things that are built into the tool or the framework, things that some other testers who have come before you have already solved. And because if you come from a development, particularly if you come from a development background, you're used to hand coding everything, going to Stack Overflow, and building your own solutions, and you end up not taking full advantage of whatever tool or framework you're using. So if we go to the next slide, the impact, of course, is it will take a lot longer to do things. Everything's going to take a lot longer because you're building everything from scratch. The other thing is you're not using standard features, so the maintenance is much harder. Because if someone else rolls onto the team who was using the same tool before, they won't actually understand your script because they won't understand why you did things in a certain strange way because you built stuff yourself that they know they would have done it differently using a built-in feature. And it also creates the lock-in for the developer. Now, it's great for job security, but it's horrible for maintenance and bad for the organization. I know, Bob, you had a story about this.
Well, you know, it's back to I had mentioned earlier about the engineer that created a framework that only he understood, and during 6 months they had not executed a single test, and nobody else knew how to maintain it. And you used a phrase yesterday, Adam, that I loved. It's, you know, a framework and test automation should be designed and developed for an organization, not for an individual. I believe that, you know, that's how you'd word it, and that's exactly right. Everybody's got to remember that at some point, you know, we may not be around, so somebody has to maintain and continue using. I was thrilled a few years ago when I found out that an automated test I had created for a company about 12 years ago was still being executed, and they were still getting ROI on that. So that's always a good feeling.
Absolutely. And if you go to the next slide, one thing what would be to train all users on an automation tool. So even though they might know, JavaScript, because they've used that to program with, they don't know the particular framework that's using JavaScript. And so therefore, just in that example, make sure they understand and learn that the framework is adding features beyond the language itself. Train everyone and make sure everyone learns that and then have peer and code reviews. So that way, if you look at someone's code and say, well, why are you doing this when you could do it this way? That's how you will learn. So for example, there are lots of common scenarios in testing that you don't see in development. For example, verifying an object is on the screen. Waiting, like programming languages don't generally want to wait. You want to do it as fast as possible. But in automated testing, being able to intelligently wait for something to be ready is a critical part of testing. It's one of the most important things to make a test reliable. And so most frameworks or tools have features for waiting, verifying something's on the screen, handling bizarre things that happen on the app, like some window pops up in front of you that wasn't the app being tested. Lots of these edge cases are not as edge cases for testing. And so when you're using a programming language first approach, you don't know these, and so you have to try and build this all. This all usually comes with a good framework, whether it's a commercial tool or open source tool. For the most part, these problems have been solved by someone else that you can leverage and have been done in a way that's reliable versus something you roll together yourself that's going to end up potentially being very flaky. Next slide.
So these are the top 10 challenges in review. One of the things I want to emphasize to everybody is these are sequential, not necessarily in order. Adam and I have seen a lot of these equally throughout different organizations, but right now, Adam's going to provide a demo, and he's going to focus on those 3 in a dark orange, number 1, number 7, and 10. So Adam, we're going to turn it over to you so that you can share everybody utilizing Rapise, just how people can overcome some of these challenges.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to show my screen 1 second while I just get rid of close the PowerPoint and bring up the apps. Hold on, and show my screen. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, okay, great. So there are a couple of different things I want to show you, and we haven't got a lot of time, so I'll be relatively quick. The first thing is when we talk about team-based approaches and team working together, make sure that you're using tools that will make your team's life easier. So today we've got the Rapise test automation tool right here. I'm going to be building a simple set of tests with it, and that's a tool that will record the tests. It will play them back both locally, and it can play them back in an unattended way. And then to do the unattended execution, we have our test management tool, SpiroTest, which can actually be used to centrally store and version the tests, allow team collaboration. It's also what we can use to run the tests on different machines and track all the results. It can also be used to track all the metrics. So if you want to see how long tests are taking, you've got functionality built into the tool to see what's passing, what's failing, how long they took, by checking the durations. So you can actually see how much time a manual test took, how much time the same automated test took, and create metrics for yourself. So good management tools and good automation tools go hand in hand. So I'm going to be talking about, first of all, not in the exact order. First of all, let's talk about building a script, and then we're going to data drive it, and then we're going to run it in an unattended way. Now, I'm only going to be recording a very simple script because of time constraints, but we could definitely do something more complicated. So I'm going to use this sample application I have over here. And I'm going to log into this with 3 or 4 different users. So first of all, I go to my automation tool, and I'm going to create a new test. Now, when you create a test, I'm going to store it in my test management tool. I'll just put it in here. We'll call it webinar test 2. And here we go. And we can, in this particular tool we have, Rapise, you can actually test different technologies. I'll be doing a web test today, but the concepts and the functionality are very similar for desktop and mobile. And in fact, when you're looking at your team and skills, understanding what you'll be testing is really important. If you're going to do web, mobile, and desktop with the same team, make sure the skills and tools reflect that. Just choosing a tool and choosing skills that will only allow you to do web testing means you then have to retrain everyone on the other technologies and the other platforms. And there's definitely unique challenges to the different types of app you're testing. I'm going to test on one browser, record on one browser, but also we can play back on multiple. So when we talk about data-driven testing and unattended execution, one of the most important things is, can I run it on multiple machines as well, and different types of browser, different types of machine? So it's not just data like login and password or the name of the test test data that you're creating. The data-driven is also running across different environments. That's test data. So let's go ahead and create a Firefox test. And the last thing is, with our tool in particular, but many tools follow the same approach, there's been a big move towards low code or no code or codeless or scriptless automation. And then there's other situations where you can do things directly in code. Some tools do no code, some tools do low code, and some tools are in code. There's no right or wrong. It depends on your skill and your team, what they have the skills to use, what they know, and what's maintainable for the entire team. So we're going to use the low code option, Rapise Visual Language, which also does allow us to add code if necessary. Okay, so as you can see from a test design standpoint, this is where the test will get built. It's a no-code model, so it's basically a series of actions and checks, which we'll do. And then in terms of the last item which on the list, which was choosing a test framework and not building it from scratch, and looking for things, not focusing on the scripting. Many of the frameworks provide lots of utility objects, and the Rapise is no different. So for example, if I want to get test data from a particular database, we have built-in functionality to do that. If in my test I want to open up a file like a CSV file and access it and make changes to it or read data from it or upload it, having functionality to do that's really important. Don't write it from scratch. Same thing if you're testing on a browser. There's things we can do on a browser. We can check for pop-up windows, the confirmation boxes that pop up that can often block a test. We've got functionality to handle all of that we've spent time doing. Another very common need is generating test data. or we've got a test data generator right here in the tool, and versus having to create something from scratch. So I guess these are some really important things that a testing framework has that aren't necessarily in a programming framework, a programming language out of the box. And the last one is when we're doing tests or any kind of data manipulation, being able to check different conditions. Does something exist? Does something not exist? Can we check the image? Can we check the text? Having lots and lots of checking tools is really important for testing that isn't necessarily part of development. And I should also mention encryption and decryption. How many times are we going to test passwords and we don't want to have them in clear in our test design? And so, a programmer can go to Stack Overflow and get some encryption utility, but many test frameworks already have built-in functionality for encrypting and decrypting test data safely and storing it safely too. So don't reinvent the wheel. Make sure you have these kinds of features available. Okay, let's go ahead and record the test. So I'm going to go here and record, and I'm going to just click over here. And in this case, I'm going to record a simple example. I'm going to log in like that. We've captured the login. We're going to put in the initial login. I will be data driving this after the fact. I'm going to log in like that. I'm now going to verify my login was correctly. So make sure whenever you're doing testing that you're verifying, not just doing actions. So I verified that I've logged in correctly. I'll just add that in. Okay. I would normally do more functionality here. I'd click around and navigate, but we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to have to cut that short. So I'm just going to log out. So I verified a login, and I would hit finish. And when we go back to the ROI calculations, you might say, well, that's a really short test. As a manual tester, I would have clicked around a lot more. But actually, there's a lot of ROI. I can actually now run this test and log in with different users and make sure that the login system works as expected or breaks as expected. And that's already huge ROI. I think how long it would take someone to run logging in through 10 different users and 4 or 5 different browsers manually. That's probably an hour of work. This thing can do it in probably 2 minutes. So this is a really good example of a high ROI test where we've deliberately done automation that's very repetitive, very mundane, and yet we can really simplify and streamline. So that's really
Hey,
important.
Adam.
Yep.
I have a great question. So someone wants to know if the test management tool in Rapise resets test data to initial values after a test is run.
That's a great question. So test data in the application or test data in the test. So in the case of the test data in the test, yes, every time we run this, Spira test can send different test data through. So I'm going to show you how to put test data into this test natively in Rapise, but inside of Spira test, we do have a feature where we can actually manage the test data externally. For example, right here, I've got a situation where I've got a list of browsers and logins, sorry, operating systems, I'm sorry. I've got another example where I've got the same thing, but I've got the login name, librarian, and various things. So we've got different test data in Spira and in the test management tool, and we can then loop through these each time. And every time we run this test set, it's going to go through from beginning to end this test data. So the test data itself will start from the beginning. However, a really important caution would be this application, if I go and log in and add some books, now I've logged in and not done anything. So I can run through this test 100 times. It's not going to change the state of the app. But once I start writing data to the test, if I go in here and create a book, the next time I run that test, there's already going to be a book in the system. And if that book is not allowed to have the same name, it might block on the second attempt. So one of the things you have to figure out, which is not part of our tool, but it's something that you would need to figure out is what's your system data strategy? Like every time you run the test, are you going to run a piece of code that will cleanse the live system being tested so that its data is reset? Or are you going to have it run as part of a build pipeline where you're literally rebuilding the app every time before you run the test? There's different approaches, but certainly the testing tools will generally look after the data that you're using to do the testing, but they won't generally look after the data in the app that's being tested. And so that's something to really bear in mind. So with that being said, we've got this test. I will just prove that it works by running it back one time, and then I will show you some test data, and then we'll run it unattended. So first, let's play it back. And I'm playing it back on my machine using the interactive button. Oh, and I broke something. Hold on, what did I do? Let's see. Nullas. I was clicking around, and sometimes in these tests, when I'm clicking around, I inadvertently do something weird. So let me just try it again. I should just play back. There we go. In demos, you're always going to be careful of clicking and typing as you're talking. There we go. So that played back unattended, semi-unattended because I'm watching it obviously. To run it back fully unattended, what you would do is save it back to the test management tool, which is stored in this case on the cloud, but it could be on-premise or in a private cloud, depending on, again, your needs specifically. And that's always very important to check from a test strategy where is your data being stored? Does it comply with whatever rules you have? Okay, I've saved it to the test management tool, and now I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go over to a test set, and I'm going to create a test set and just run this one test. In real life, we'd probably want to run lots of tests to really get the ROI, but we'll just do it one time for today. Webinar testing. So I'm going to take that test set. I'm going to add my one automated case to it, which is right here. And it's in the regression folder, and it's called webinar. I think I've created a couple during, webinar test 2. Okay, save that. All right, now in terms of data, I could link this then to one of my test configurations. That's all that test data I showed you. That would loop through it multiple times. I'm not going to do that right now. What I'll do though is I'm going to tell it to run on my machine, which is called TARDIS. In real life, I'd run it on a separate machine, but then you wouldn't see it, so I won't do that. And then I'm going to do plan date right now. And to get the real value of automation, what you'll usually want to do is have it either run on a frequent schedule like this, or have it automatically run whenever a pipeline runs. So if you've got a Jenkins job running, you can automatically schedule this run to run every single time Jenkins finishes successfully. And so that's an important set of features that you might want to look for depending on how you actually build the software. Okay, that's scheduled for automation. That's it, I'm done. To run it, I'm just going to close down my designing tool. And in our case, we have a separate launching tool, which doesn't require a license fee. Depending on the tools you're using, that may be different. And so it's going to run and check. And I'm going to move over to this page so you can see it run, though you don't need to. It will run with a completely fine invisible. So it's going to play back. And once it's finished, this time around, it looks the same as the last time, but actually it's being stored in the test management tool. So you could be on a completely different machine somewhere else, and you can have hundreds of tests running. And in the test management tool, meanwhile, over here, you would see all the tests running, you see the status, and again, we only had one, but imagine you have hundreds of tests here all running. You'll see them go pass, 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 pass as they run, and when you go to the test run that it's created, you have a permanent record. Because one of the reasons why people, I think, don't want to do things unattended is they're afraid they'll lose information. They didn't see it. They didn't see what happened. Why did it break? How do I diagnose the failure? So it's really good to have good telemetry and logging. And in this case, you can see the test ran. We've tracked the time. We're tracking each click and a screenshot of exactly what happened. So if we do hit a failure, we're not only going to see what failed and why it failed, we'll see the steps that led up to that failure. So that way you can diagnose the problem. And if you have this kind of automation and results tracking and archiving, people will then have much more confidence in letting things run unattended because they know they can get to the data. So that's an example there of unattended test execution. And then the last piece I just like to show is the data-driven. We could do it in our test management tool, or if you want to do data-driven testing, this script, again, it's a very simple script. It took me maybe a minute to record, and to get the real value out of it, we need to run it many times because that's the value of automation, as Bob mentioned. So if we go now into our test, I'm just going to show you how to quickly make this a data-driven test the quickest way possible. There are some other ways using external sources of data like a web service or a database. If you don't have any of that, we just create what's called a map like this, and we give it a name. We'll call it users and passwords. And all I'll do is create 2 columns, username, password. I'm going to get rid of these 2 or 3, yeah, like that. And I'm going to add in just 2 lines for now, librarian, and then we'll have a wrong one. It'll be, admin, bad password, and that's my test. And the way you need to do now is take this set of tests. I can wrap that in a loop. So again, back to the assessment questionnaire, you should at least know what a loop is. If you don't know how to be a programmer, connect the loop around that, link that to my data set, and now replace these hard-coded values that you don't want living in the test to actually be data-driven, and we just replace those with variable names. And there's a typo in the name of username, but the systems don't care, so that's fine, like that. And password, and verify the same thing. Verify the password matches. I mean the login matches. like that. So we've now taken a hard-coded test and we've made it data-driven. And so we can now run this test twice. So we'll go over here, run it twice, and that will be our demo. So I'm going to hit the play button, and it should pass the first time and fail the second time, hopefully, if all goes to plan. I say that because of the demo.
That's right. Anything can happen on a live demo, absolutely. And I think, everybody can see how intuitive the solution is, as good, solid automation solution should be. And Adam did all of this while he was, giving a presentation as well. He's talking and he's doing this at the same time, multitasking.
And there you go. First iteration passed, second iteration failed, object is not found. And in this case, the tool is giving us reasons. Now, one of the things about automation is, as Bob mentioned, automation is not intuitively knowing the application. If I'm a human, I look at a screen, I know what happens and what shouldn't happen. You're doing a lot of intuitive checking. What I did here is I added an explicit check to be, does the login name appear in the window? And what it's telling me is it didn't. And in this case, that's because there's an error actually in my application, or perhaps the error is that the login and password are incorrect in my test data. So whenever you get a failure like this, you have to determine, did the application break, or was my test data bad? Or was I meant to be testing the negative case and I didn't realize? So depending on what the case is, it may be a failure in the test, or a failure in the application, or a failure in the test data. But then that's when you can apply, look at what's reported back and make a determination. So that's the live demo. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Bob, for wrapping up questions.
Yeah. Real quick, Adam, and I know we're over time, but I think this might be an important one while you're on here. For organizations that are DevOps oriented, does the Inflectra cloud platform have an API to support integration into other automated test platforms?
Great question. Yes. So we have two products: our automation tool and our ALM project management DevOps tool, Spira. And Spira has APIs and extensions and plugins. So we have plugins for a variety of different automation tools, because as I think Bob and I had mentioned at the beginning, automation is something that's very dependent on the app being tested and the skills that you have. So if someone wants to integrate, say, Cypress or Selenium, Test Complete, or any other number of tools, UFT, that are out there, depending on what they're automating, depending on the skills of the team, we recognize that those tools may be more or less appropriate for that particular testing activity and strategy. And so we do have an open API and connectors for those tools, because automation is not in a vacuum. The right tool will be the right tool for the particular team and the application being tested. Testing SAP or a mainframe is not the same as testing a mobile app, and not every tool will be appropriate for every single job.
Yeah, great questions, and everybody, we really appreciate you hanging in there with us. Sorry that we ran a little bit long, Adam, and I want to be very respectful of your time, but please feel free to keep submitting questions, because as I mentioned, Adam and I will be answering all of the questions on the spreadsheet. We won't be dividing them. We'll each be giving our own thoughts. If you ever want to reach out to either one of us, this is just about Checkpoint Technologies. We've been in business now for almost 20 years this January. We provide services, software solutions, and training and mentoring. We're very proud to be a partner with Inflectra. And Inflectra, Adam, I'll let you speak to this.
So thanks, Bob. We at Inflectra enjoy working with Bob and the Checkpoint team. We've worked together for many years. Inflectra, we are about quality. That's our fundamental mission, bringing quality to your software lifecycle, whether that's development, testing, risk management. Quality is a much bigger discipline than just testing. We believe quality should be throughout the lifecycle. And if you look here, we have tools and functionality that cover everything from requirements definition to testing to IT service management and project management. Throughout that, though, the common thread is quality in all those activities.
So again, thank you so much, everybody. Adam, thank you so much, sir. I've really enjoyed it. Katie, thank you for being our outstanding moderator.
Thanks,
and
Katie.
Everyone, here's Adam's contact information. Here's mine. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Email us anytime with questions, and we'll be following up with a lot of you. Thank you again. Have a great day. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Katie. Nice to meet you, everyone.